I have had requests from several people in here to talk more about Orthodox Christianity. We've talked about some things about it before, but it seems there is interest in it from the number of comments I've gotten about it. So I wanted to put several things together today and get a broader overview of the basics of Orthodox Christianity. Now, most of us are familiar with the version of Christianity we've been associated with. If you grew up Presbyterian, that's what you're familiar with. If you grew up Baptist, that's what you're familiar with. Methodist, Episcopal, or whatever. And it's easy for us to think that that is Christianity. And we can get blinders on and not see anything else. And so I think it's good for us to look at other very different forms of Christianity. The horizon is much broader than you might think. So first I want to start by defining what Orthodox means. We hear that word thrown around a lot in other things other than to Orthodox Christianity, but it simply means according to tradition. That's what Orthodox means. And that should give you some kind of hint about what Orthodox Christianity is about, that it is about tradition, and that it has changed less than other forms of Christianity. So, Orthodox Christianity did not accept many of the changes that came about in other forms of Christianity. There are 300 million Orthodox Christians in the world, 2 to 3 million in the United States. Most Orthodox Christians live in Russia and Central and Eastern Europe. Now, we usually call Orthodox Christianity Eastern, and from our perspective, it is Eastern. It is east of Europe, and that's where the Eastern comes from. A lot of Americans automatically think of Greek Orthodox when they think of Orthodox Christianity. But the reason for that is because most of the Orthodox Christians in the United States came from Greek heritage and lineage. And so that's the reason people think of it as Greek. So the two big divides in Christianity, the two big sides, are Orthodox on the eastern side, that's east of Europe. And then there's the western side. And then the western side is Protestant and Roman Catholic, and that is sometimes called the Latin side, because the early language of that branch of Christianity was Latin. The difference that defines Orthodox and Roman Catholic is how they interpret the word Son in Son of God. That's the basic difference right there. All the differences really between Western and Eastern Christianity come from that. How they interpret Son in Son of God. Now, a lot of times, last week we talked about how many things are changing today in Christianity and have changed in the past 100 or so years. Now, a lot of people like to think that that's new. That Christianity started out here with Jesus and the disciples, and then it went through one line. Depending if you're Methodist, you think it went through John Wesley. If you're Presbyterian, you think it went through John Calvin. You know, it went through one line from Jesus straight to us, and that's all there ever was. That's not the way it happened. There were a lot of twists and turns along the way. And this has been true about Christianity since the very beginning. It has always been this way. Things are going in this direction. Here they go. Somebody comes up with a different idea, a new interpretation. And they go off to the side. Some people follow them. And then later, comes up with a different new interpretation. They go off over here, and some people follow in. And then off of this new interpretation over here, somebody comes up with yet a new interpretation of that, and they go off from that. And after that happens for 2,000 years, you have an absolute web of all these different things that have developed. And the result of it is the plethora of beliefs that we have in Christianity today. There are many different branches of Christianity with their different beliefs. That was slapped me in the face this week at a funeral that I attended. It's been so long since I had been exposed to that kind of Christianity that it was shocking to me. But anyway, so let's imagine that we go back to the year 400. Now, in the year 400, there has been a lot less web created because it's 1,600 years less than there is now. Christianity is distributed over a wide area of land in two different types of civilization. There's Western civilization. And the dividing line of that is Italy and everything west. That's Western civilization. Then there's East, and that goes from Greece on over into like Turkey and those places. Those two civilizations are very different. It's sort of like how our society in the United States today is different than the society of China. It's two different, completely different cultures and societies. So in the year 400, we have Christianity in two different societies. And in the West, and we've talked about this before, a man named Augustine comes along in the 400s, and he has a new idea. 400 years after Jesus, he has a new idea. The Western side accepts his idea, the Eastern side does not. And remember what Augustine did was invent the idea of original sin. He said that ever since Adam and Eve ate the fruit in the Garden of Eden, sinners is all we can be because God flew off the handle and changed human nature and made it so from that point on we were all born sinners. You are a sinner because God made you that way, and you will spend eternity in hell because God has decided that since you're a sinner, that's what's going to happen to you. The Western side accepted that, the Eastern side did not. And you can see this is the grounds for a major separation here. This idea that Augustine came up was a game changer. It changed everything. And you better believe it changed everything. And so the Western side began to veer off and go over here. And then another strand of that web developed out of Augustine's thought. And this idea said that when you sin, you create a debt to God. It's like you have a loan balance. Whenever you sin, you owe something to God. God stamps your book, and your debt increases. Every time you sin, your debt increases. You owe God. The only payment God will accept for that is a perfect blood sacrifice. That means the death of a sinless person. So the only way you can ever pay this debt that you're incurring, that's increasing day by day, is by perfect blood sacrifice. But who can do that? Remember, we just talked about how God made it to where all human beings sin. So everybody has this huge debt they're racking up to God, and basically God has made it so that nobody can ever pay that debt. This new web is coming out over here. People are sinners, they cannot pay the debt. And out of that, a new strand emerges. The web's getting thicker. They came up with a new idea about Jesus. Jesus, in this new view, was in heaven, up there with God, completely separate from God, a separate divine being. He had Jesus walking along over here, and you had God walking along over here. They're two separate people. And Jesus was looking down on earth, and he saw the human predicament, and he said, send me. I'll go to earth, and I'll become a human being. Then I'll live a sinless life. Then I'll get myself killed. Then you'll have your perfect blood sacrifice for sin. Will you be satisfied then? So Jesus and God made this deal, and God agreed. And so Jesus got born on earth as a person. He lived a sinless life. He got himself crucified, and God had his perfect sacrifice for sin. You see, in this sense, it was the sense of sacrifice. Jesus sacrificed himself as a human being, and God sacrificed the person that his son became as a human being for the sins of the world. It was a transaction between Jesus and God. So you see, the very nature of this transaction requires that Jesus be a third party. Jesus is the third party standing between us and God. It's something other and less than God. So here you have God who demands payment for sin. Then you have human beings who can't pay. Jesus then steps in, pays, and offers himself to satisfy the blood sacrifice. So as that developed over here in the West, that's how the West began to look at Jesus, both in what he did and in what sense he was the Son of God. Jesus was seen as a third party, a completely separate entity than God. People began to look at Jesus as the Son in almost a literal biological sense, like human fathers have sons. And as this was happening, the Christians in the East saw this and they said, wait a minute. We see a lot of problems with these new ideas you guys have come up with. What about the doctrine of the Trinity? I thought you said God was one, inseparable. But now you're making Jesus into a completely separate entity. You're violating the doctrine of the Trinity. But anyway, we don't agree with this idea you people have come up with that says that since Adam and Eve, God made everybody to be 100% sinners. And that God has decided the penalty for that is to burn in hell for eternity. Sorry, we just can't accept that. We just can't accept it. We're going with the way we've always looked at it, and the way it used to be looked at before you guys came up with all these new ideas. So eventually, these different ways of looking at things that developed in the West caused a split in the year 1054. There were societal factors, political factors, and other minor things that contributed to the split. But the main reason for the split was that the East could not accept the new directions the West was going in. They said, we just can't accept this stuff you people have come up with. And so it split in the year 1054. So if the people in the East didn't like the new ideas that had developed in the West, what did they believe? Well, instead of believing that after Adam and Eve ate the fruit, God got mad and had a fit and flew off the handle and ruined everything, you see, they realized that was just something Augustine read into it. So they said, well, we're going to say what we've always said. When Adam and Eve ate the fruit, that did not change human nature so that we're capable of nothing with sin. We're going to stay with what we've always said, that when they ate the fruit, we became captive to sin. And you see, captive was the key word. We're not changed. We're still capable of good. But what happened is that we were grabbed by something and we were taken captive. When Adam and Eve ate the fruit, something grabbed a hold of us and got us in its clutches. And this thing that grabbed a hold of us and got it in its clutches is the reason we're going to spend eternity in hell. Not because God's going to send us there, but because it's going to drag us down into hell. You see, this idea that God decided that hell would happen because people sinned was something the West came up with later. And in the view that was held before that, God did not want us to go to hell. Obviously, if God wanted us to go to hell, He never would have done it to Jesus. He would just let everybody go there. So you see, this thing that wants us to go to hell is not God, it's Satan. Sin makes people captive to Satan, and that's why you go to hell. Not because that's what God decided, not because that's what God wants, but because sin makes you captive to Satan, and Satan drags you there. You see, the people in the East did not like this new idea that saw every person from the moment of their birth as a filthy sinner, incapable of any good. They saw human beings as having been kidnapped and held captive by Satan. And that is a tremendous difference. It's two different religions. But there was another difference too. I think we've talked about this one before a long time ago. What's the main difference between human beings and God? The main difference is that God created us, but God was created by no one. God is from eternity. God has always been. We were made. God is. At some point we were not, but then we were created. There was no time when God was not, but there was a time when we were not. That's why we are called creatures. Notice the similarity of creatures to creation or creating. So this creates the separation between us and God. We are the created, while God is the uncreated. And so let's say that God doesn't like that there is a separation between us and Him, and He wants to bridge that gap. We can't bridge that gap. We can't bridge over to God. Only God can bridge over to us. And so that's what God does. By becoming a person in Jesus, God comes over to us. God is the only one who can overcome that separation. He becomes one of us, becomes a human being just like us in Jesus. And according to the Orthodox, that's what we see in Jesus. God crosses the gap and becomes a human being. Then He lives, He's killed, He rises from the dead with this human body, and then what does He do? He ascends into heaven in that human body. Now, in most forms of Protestant and Roman Catholic Christianity, the ascension is not very important. In most forms of Protestant Christianity, the resurrection is not very important. It all focuses on the crucifixion, and the resurrection is just sort of an add-on, and they hardly mention the ascension. But in Orthodox Christianity, you see the resurrection and the ascension are essential, because in the resurrection, Jesus is resurrected in His human body, and in the ascension, He ascends to heaven. How? In His human body. And so you see the gap between God and humanity is closed. God came here, became one of us, then took our humanity with Him back over the gap. And that's what the phrase means, that Jesus is seated at the right hand of God. A lot of times people really get that one messed up, but that original meaning of that phrase is just that Jesus in His real human body ascended into heaven and took humanity over to God's side. He is seated at the right hand of God. We are seated at the right hand of God. The book of Ephesians says that we are already in heaven with God now. Our humanity was taken over by Jesus. So now you have no more doubt separating God and human beings. And now God and humanity are all together on God's side. But something else happened. Remember we talked about how Satan was dragging everybody down to hell? When Jesus rose from the dead, Jesus broke that chain. He shattered the gates of hell and broke those chains. The captivity to Satan was broken. And in that human body, Jesus rose from the grave and broke the chains of death and hell. And he took that human body back over to God's side again. God has come across here and pulled us over to him. And what was left over here now is Satan's power, which is death and hell. But we're no longer chained to that now. We're over here on God's side. God has bridged the gap between himself and us. He defeated the power of Satan and Satan's grip on humanity, and he took us there over with him to his side. And this is what makes us be like God. He has changed our lowliness into his glory. 2 Corinthians said, we all with open face, beholding as in a mirror the glory of the Lord, are changed into the same image by the Spirit of the Lord. We know that when Christ appears, we shall be like him. We shall be like him. So this is how the Orthodox understand things in a general sense. And you can see how that is related to what's meant with Son. Was Son a separate divine being less than God? Or was Son God himself? Isaiah chapter 7 says, behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. God with us. God with us. Now you can see that this is a very different way of looking at things than either Protestant or Roman Catholic Christianity. It may be offensive to some people because it so goes against, the things we've been taught. Though, the older I get, the more I sort of lean towards that, because I think it really, that God to me that would do that is the most majestic, compassionate, loving,